welcome to the Pink Pony Club. Just kidding, but maybe I should rename this podcast that. Hello, Internet. It's me, Audrey from... I need to take these glasses off. These dang lights. Okay. Hello, Internet, and welcome to the Pink Pony Club. Hello, Internet. Welcome to the Pink Pony Club. Just kidding. Hello, Internet. It's me, Audrey from Fire and Fiber. Did you miss me as much as I missed you? If this is your first time joining, welcome. My name is Audrey, and this is the Fire and Fiber podcast where I talk about knitting, all of my thrift acquisitions, mental health, really whatever strikes my fancy. I am a mother and healthcare worker living in southwestern Ontario on the Haldimand Tract. For those of you who don't know, the Haldimand Tract is part of an agreement between the Six Nations of the Grand River and the Canadian government that was made in the 1860s. And like many other agreements with First Nations communities, the Canadian government has still not upheld their end of the bargain. So like I said, this is my knitting podcast. Can we take a moment for the backdrop? This was a very harebrained idea on my part. It is actually put up with a retractable clothing line. I'm not confident it won't fall out of the wall. My house is 110 years old, and so the walls are plaster. I put it up. We're just going to go with it and really hope for the best. I am definitely not like a handy person, but I had a vision, and I think we're almost there. Anyways, I'm wearing also my World's Okayest Knitter t-shirt. I thrifted this for $3.99 a couple years ago, and I absolutely love it. So today I am going to be talking about something a little bit different. First, I wanted to talk about one of my whips. I started this a few days ago, and gosh, it is as addictive as everyone says. This is the Jaunty Shawl by Andrea Mowry of Drea Renee Knits. I'm knitting this in Lang Infinity. I got 4 balls of this in a lucky bag from the Knitting Loft that I ordered a while ago, and I thought this really fun color changing yarn would be perfect. They sent me 4 different colors of the yarn, so like 4 different balls or colorways. I'm really happy with how it's working up, and yeah, there's a reason her patterns are so popular. So I just finished, I am almost on the 1 ball, and I've actually just started on my row decreases. This is a really fun pattern too, because she gives you general guidelines on how to use different weights of yarn and different gauges, things like that. I'm only opting to use 2 for my worsted weight yarn, and I've started my decreases. When I measured up until my decreases, I was at about 30 inches pre-blocking. So I think this will make a really nice length, and yeah, very meditative. Like I said, I probably only started it like, gosh, not even a week ago. And I think I started it in the evening, and I think the first night I did probably like here in 2 hours. So not bad at all. So I don't have a lot of time to film today, mostly because this took up a lot and I have a million things on the go. And I wanted to talk about something that I've been thinking about discussing on my channel since I started, which is my mental health journey and Hi. I wanted to talk about today I'm going to be doing a knit and chat where I'm going to talk about something that has been on my mind, something that I've been considering sharing probably since I started my channel, and that is my mental health journey and actually my experience with ketamine infusion therapy. So I have to put some disclaimers here right away. The first is that I am absolutely 100 million% not a mental health professional. I'm not a medical professional. This is not any sort of advice. This is purely me sharing my experience as a consenting adult who was able to make an informed choice about my medical treatment. So again, I am not encouraging anyone. I'm not providing any advice, any feedback. I'm not a medical professional. I'm not a mental health professional. But this is just my experience. And again, there's a lot that goes into that. Again, this is just my personal experience. There is no recommendation here. There is no encouragement. There's no feedback other than, if you are struggling, please seek help from a qualified professional who is not me. I am just a dumb girl on YouTube who knits. I'm literally just a girl. So, like I said, I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not a medical professional. This is not medical advice. I also wanted to add a trigger warning. I'm going to be talking about some really heavy stuff here, mental health and the like. And a lot of traumas. So if you are not in a place to hear that, you like if you're not in a place where you feel like you're going to be okay to hear that, like please exit out. There is no shade. Like protect your own peace more than anything else. And yeah, so definitely like a lot of content warning and trigger warning before we get started. I think if you want to talk about where you're going, you need to know where you've been. So, as a child, youth, adolescent, I struggled for a very long time, beginning in my teen years. I, how do I preface this? So, had a very, hmm, I had a very tough childhood. I had a lot of stuff that happened to me. So, I think when telling a story or in order to know where you're going, you need to know where you've come from. And so my story starts, I had on the surface and from the outside looking in, I had a very, very wonderful life. And I'm not discounting the privilege that I had in my upbringing or anything of the like. And I'm not, this is my story. It's not the story of other people. This is just my truth. I also believe that I heard a quote a long time ago that it's like, if people don't like you own your truth and you own your story. And if people don't like how they're portrayed, they should have behaved better. That's an oversimplification for a lot of situations, but I think that's something to keep in mind. So I am a biological only child. I was raised first in Ontario, and then my parents planned to move to the States. My dad had been recruited from his company to go work in California, and he went. And him and my mom, while my mom was back here settling the affairs, my dad wasn't sure if he wanted to continue to be married. Anyways, they they ended up working it out, and we moved to California, and that is where I spent my formative years. Um, I lived in the Santa Clarita Valley, just north of LA, from the ages of 7 to 16. Again, only child, very privileged upbringing. Yeah, just like yeah, there's a lot there. I think also it's important to recognize. Um, I believe that people are inherently good. I believe in the inherent goodness of people, and I think that everyone is doing the best that they can with the tools that they have. No holds barred. So I gosh, let's see. Yeah, so I probably showed a lot of signs of anxiety as a child, but I was like, even though I have been diagnosed with ADHD as an adult, I was diagnosed when I was 32 or 33, after seeking out a diagnosis or an assessment, because my son was diagnosed. It's actually, I'm reading a book about ADHD right now, and it's actually called like the mommy factor, which is that a lot of women get diagnosed after they have kids and their children are also diagnosed, especially because ADHD presents so differently in girls than it does in boys. And primarily, any studies, treatment plans, medication, all that stuff is really geared towards boys. So I, um, I definitely showed a lot of those signs as a kid. I also showed what I think is really, I think like many girls with ADHD, I was definitely a high achiever, people pleaser, gifted and talented, all that sort of thing. But I really struggled socially and really struggled socially, but I did well academically. When I was 13, my dad, um, who is, you know, super healthy, went to the gym 6 days a week, sort of went to the gym, ate really well, all that good stuff, had been having some what he thought was heart problems. I love living in an old house. You can hear all the creaking. I'm not going to get super deep into it, but my dad died suddenly and unexpectedly when I was 13, and he was 43. And that obviously changed the trajectory of my life. When, if you ever look at, it's called like the ACEs, like adolescent childhood experiences, on like a trauma scale. Loss of a parent is one. So, anyways, my dad died, and it was just my mom and I, and we had a pretty tumultuous relationship, still do. When I was 16, we moved back to Canada, which I was actually really happy about. I, again, struggled really struggled socially. And as you know, when I struggled socially prior to my dad dying, and then after my dad died, the few friends that I had, I really didn't really have anymore. I think kids don't know how to handle death and grief, and my friends especially. So yeah, I again did really well academically, struggled socially. So we moved back to Canada when I was 16, and I did my grade 11 and 12 years back here. And I really liked it. It was a fresh start for me. But I was struggling still mentally. I had always been made fun of by my family and people around me for being overly emotional or overly, disorganized or scatterbrained or, ditzy. I've got, 2000s were a wild time. Um, you know, it was like a free for all for the adults in my life to comment on my body, even though I was technically a child. Um, and what I looked like physically and how that related to how I presented myself to the world and how I acted. And, anyways, I could make a whole other thing about that. But so when I was 17, my mom met my stepdad, and I had really struggled, like many kids do, with the idea of my mom dating, and really resisted, didn't do well with it. And it was around this time I started having mental health issues. Previously, my mom had, I think from the age of, gosh, I want to say 14 or 15, might have even been 16. I know I was still in California. I was definitely 14. So probably from the age of like 14 or 15, my mom put me on birth control, hormonal birth control, because according to her, like my mood swings were just like too wild and I was out of control. So I was too emotional. So I was put on birth control for that, even though I was not at all sexually active. Anyways, so once I was, so up until that point, yeah, I was on that. And like I said, I started to struggle in my senior year of high school. And towards the end of my grade 12 year, I actually attempted to take my own life a few times. So, um, and again, I don't blame anyone on this. My school's response, my guidance counselor's response, everyone's response was to cover it up, not talk about it, don't tell anyone. I was excused from classes until the end of the year, excused from all my exams. I had already gotten into university. And so my guidance counselors decided to just direct my teachers to give me whatever grade I probably had before, which was, I mean, I was still doing well. Um, and then I was going to come back for graduation. And so I was sent home with not really much support either time. And I didn't want to go to my high school graduation. My stepdad actually paid me to go. It was around this time that like we were also getting ready to move. My mom was moving to Cambridge from Georgetown. Her and my stepdad had bought a house together and they were going to Brady Bunch it up. And so, yeah, there was a lot going on. A lot going on. Also, in high school, like many kids, I had started to party and drink and, um, you know, all the stuff that is not good for uh, an undeveloped adolescent brain. When so I ended up graduating and I moved to Cambridge and I went to university. I think by this time I had been put on probably antidepressants. I I can't really remember, but I'm assuming that probably from 18 onward I was on some sort of antidepressant. And I went through university, did pretty well my first year, and then steadily things declined. I had a really bad breakup that I did not handle well. And again, I was drinking 3 to 5 nights a week. Just really, 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 really tough time. I decided I'd gotten in a new relationship. That relationship broke down in my 4th year of university, which I had already opted around that time to not continue to pursue my education degree, which is what I originally went to university for, and just finish with my bachelor's. Like, I was burnt out. I was also working my way through university. My mental health was just in the trash. Um, I had seen a psychiatrist, I want to say, or maybe like a counselor, probably a psychiatrist or psychologist at university through like my university's health program, like health clinic. And he diagnosed me as bipolar type 2, meaning he said that I experienced really short bursts of like high energy, not mania, and like really long depressive periods, which, tracked for what I was experiencing. And I tried out a whole bunch of different medications between him and probably my family doctor. And I think I also probably saw a psychiatrist at our hospital's outpatient mental health clinic. And I really did try so many different medications. Um, I never really felt like anything clicked. And at this time, I was in my 20s, living on my own, trying to do all the things, trying to graduate, trying to hold down a job, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, trying to figure out my relationships, and um, again, still drinking heavily. I, I'm trying to think here. I just lost my train of thought. So during this time, even though I remember feeling like relieved and validated by this diagnosis of bipolar type 2. I wasn't really given any direction. I wasn't really given any counseling. When I did pursue counseling periodically over these years, I would go for like 1 or 2, 3, and I nothing was clicking. Right? It takes a long time to find someone that you work well with, and that was part of it. I wasn't motivated to, because I didn't feel like I was getting better, but I don't know. It never, I didn't ever feel better. I just felt less crummy. And I would do this cycle of, especially my early 20s, where I would take my medication for a few months, decide I was fine, go off my medication, be okay, and then inevitably crash, wind up back on my medication, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. And then eventually it clicked that this was part of my reality now. And that was just how it was going to be. So I moved through life again. My 20s were really, really hard for a long time. I spent the majority of my 20s struggling with my mental health, struggling to figure out what I wanted to do with my life, figure out a purpose, struggling with relationships despite getting married, like just really, really fraught, really chaotic, lots of change constantly. I couldn't really narrow down a focus, or I couldn't hold down a job for very long. I inevitably would quit or get fired, or like, couldn't handle the interpersonal dynamics of the workforce. And again, I still had no idea what I wanted to do. Like, I tried on a whole bunch of other careers or career paths, and eventually, my husband and I were living together in this like tiny little apartment, and just trying to figure out how to be young adults, paying their way, making their way in the world. And a lot of my friends were very career focused, very like, had always had a clear path of where they wanted to go and how to get there. And I remember envying that a lot. Um, and so I had kind of gotten on, I think, a good medication by this point. I think I was doing pretty well. I do remember I was working at an insurance company, like a health, like a group benefits. I remember working in a group benefits call center, and ironically, uh, the insurance company that I was working for at the time wouldn't pay for the name brand of the medication that I was on, despite numerous letters from my doctor and appeals and things like that, they would only cover the generic version, which, you know, generics are not as effective. I don't care what anyone says, they aren't. So um, eventually I left there. We decided to start a family, which again, I struggled with this idea of starting a family and passing on whatever genetic issues I have. And I really had to think about that decision long and hard. And then we had gotten pregnant. We lost that baby, got pregnant again. I was really sort of detached from my pregnancy with my son because I had gone through this traumatic experience of wanting a baby, getting pregnant, losing the baby, getting pregnant very shortly after, even though I wasn't planning it. And so that pregnancy was hard. I had a lot of health issues, and then um, the birth was really hard. We were in, my son was in the NICU for 9 days. It was a really traumatic time. Um, I really struggled in every way possible. Really severe postpartum depression and this trauma, and yeah, it was a very, very, very dark time. And I am my son's going to be 9 next week, and it's only been recently that like I can talk about this experience without crying or without being really, really upset in the weeks leading up to his birthday, because I remember that time and I felt so unprepared and lost, and just really, again, I still wasn't entirely sure what I was doing career wise. Like I was just all over the place. And so things are kind of settled. My mental health was still not great. It wasn't terrible. It just kind of, I had accepted that like this sort of crummy baseline was where I was going to be, and I was never going to feel good. And I remember my family doctor telling me that essentially at one point, like that was a kind of a turning point for me. He's like, you're never going to feel good. You'll just feel less bad. And that to me at the time was actually really helpful. Like, obviously, that's really crummy right now, but that was what I needed at the time to sort of manage my expectations and think like, okay, what is, what could my life look like with that perspective, right? And I actually did benefit from that tidbit of advice. So I had my second baby. I decided to have another baby, and that whole pregnancy and birth, even though they were very similar to my first, especially my birth experience, it was really, really restorative and very healing. And I really thrived in my postpartum period, and I did really, really well. And I was doing well career wise. I felt like things were finally clicking. I had sort of hit my stride, my career and my home life. I kind of felt like I had it all. I had really, I had developed this really beautiful relationship with my parents, my mom, my stepdad, and my sister, my stepsister. My stepsisters and I both had all had babies at the same time. Everyone lived nearby, and my mom, my stepdad were incredible grandparents, like just incredible. And that is really magical. Is like as a parent, seeing your parents become grandparents, it is really magical, and it was. And then in April of 2022, my parents came over for Easter to tell me that my stepdad was sick, and they were very vague about it. So it was like such a parent thing. They were so evasive. And anyways, so that was April, and he passed away in August. And my whole world fell apart because not only, so I guess I should backtrack. In March of that year, I had finally been like, you know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to start to, because I'd been in therapy on and off. I was like, I'm going to start really working to address some of the childhood stuff with my dad's death and things like that. Um, and then literally a month later, my parents told me that my stepdad was sick, and it was yeah. So April to August. So he passed away in August, and my whole world fell apart because not only had I not even addressed all of the stuff with my bio dad, but now my stepdad. And as a child, I think you're really resilient. Um, I mean, that's inaccurate because we all carry our childhood traumas with us. But as a child, I was able to handle things a little bit better, way better, partially because I suddenly became my mom's caretaker and I was like the adult. But as a parent, losing a parent, I was able to see um, what I was losing and what my kids were losing. And that was just devastating. So anyways, life got really, really hard. I feel like I need a break talking about this. So I had a really, really hard time. And I went to a really dark place. So I kind of fell into this hole and I ended up in a depressive episode for almost 2 years, which was absolutely insane. Um, trying to hold my own grief, trying to take care of my mom, worrying about my siblings, worrying about my kids, worrying about my partner, like, all of this loss. And like, I'd already been dealing with the anticipatory grief of when he was sick, but now trying to support my kids and knowing what they missed out on, it was a lot. I had gone on a leave from work. I had kind of hit my wall. We'd been trying medication and trying medication, and I just, while my dad had been sick, I had started having really bad panic attacks. My doctor had prescribed me anti-anxiety medication, like to be used sparingly. Yeah, it was just really, really dark. I was really disengaged from my children and my family, and my spouse. It was just I couldn't cope, and so I hit my wall, and I was. This is also, you have to remember, like, end of the pandemic, like peak pandemic. So if I could have gone for an extended stay in the Grippy Sock Hotel, I probably would have been happy to, but there was no way. And I didn't want to leave my family, and I just, yeah, there was so many internal and external pressures. So I had started researching a couple years ago. My husband had mentioned, I think at the time it was like St. Joe's in Hamilton or Hamilton General. There was a hospital in Hamilton, either way, that had started um, exploring alternate modalities for addressing chronic mental health issues. So they had actually started with electroshock therapy, not like in the 50s and 60s, like very, very toned down. Um, and anyways, I completely dismissed it at the time, and over the years dismissed people's suggestions of like psychedelics and things like that, because I've actually never done drugs other than wacky tobacco. I've never I've never done drugs. I've never wanted to be out of control. Drinking, I've done a lot of drinking, um, but I've never done drugs. So when I hit my wall and I hit a level of desperation, I actually went to my doctor, and I started researching different treatment modalities. The three were RTMS, electroshock therapy, which has a different name now, I can't remember it, and ketamine therapy, um, because those were recognized in Canada and those were approved, and there were clinics, and it was like a very controlled environment. I went to my doctor and was fully prepared to fight for a referral, and he was like, "Oh, yep, sounds great. Which clinic do you want to go to, et cetera, et cetera." And so I got my referral in, and then within, I think, 2 weeks, I had my intake with the clinic. I had done an appointment with the psychiatrist virtually, and I'm going to stop here and then I will come back and record later because I need a break.
Oh my gosh, I've recorded the same thing like 9 times. And my microphone died. I've recorded this part like 4 times already. So in Canada, Health Canada does recognize ketamine as an off-brand usage or treatment for treatment-resistant anxiety, depression, and chronic pain. They don't formally recognize it for PTSD, but based on what I've sort of ascertained from different mental health care professionals and industry professionals, it definitely has a lot of benefit for people who struggle and suffer with PTSD as well. I had to do like a really, really long online intake that, I think I attempted it 3 or 4 times because it kept timing me out. It was so intensive. They wanted to know every medication I'd ever been on, what my dosage was, what my date, how long I was on it, what, side effects, like my efficacy. It was just bananas. And for me, I was like, I've been on them all. It's easier to just tell you what I haven't tried. So I finally got that done. Then I had an online appointment with the psychiatrist, and it was the most holistic and comprehensive interaction I've ever had with any sort of health professional, let alone a mental health professional. Like, I'm very accustomed to psychiatrists just sort of like throwing pills at you, right? And we didn't really touch that much on my medication history. He asked me about my sleep habits, my stress, my relationships, my eating habits, how much coffee I'm drinking, like, and gave me recommendations. Like, all these really definitely felt like things that were out of like the scope of traditional psychiatry. And so one of the things we were talking about was, he said, this is a treatment approved for depression, anxiety, chronic pain. You're coming to us and you're pursuing this because you feel like you have treatment resistant depression. Because I said, I've been in this depressive episode for a year and a half. I just can't get past it. And so when we were talking, he asked me at one point, he said, has anyone ever talked to you about anxiety? Like, have you ever been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, like a generalized anxiety disorder, like panic attacks? Which, I mean, I'd had a few panic attacks in my life, but I said, no, I don't have anxiety. I'm just dead tired all the time and I'm miserable and I said, like, I'm not anxious. Everyone's anxious, I we all just survived the pandemic, and I'm trying to raise small kids in this dystopian hellscape. So I everyone's anxious. Like, I'm anxious about normal things. Like, everyone's anxious. And he asked me these questions that were kind of, he prodded a little bit more, and he said, so, like, what are some of the things that you worry about? Like, what are some of the things you worry about? And I gave him an example of something. And God bless this man, he was like, we don't really use the term, we try not to use the terms like normal or abnormal. He's like, what you're describing is not normal. And I was like, oh, well, it's normal to me. Anyways, um, I learned later that was something from my childhood. But he was really, really optimistic. They wrote a letter to my insurance company to try to help support getting the infusions covered. They're incredibly expensive. Um, and he wrote this like really, really long comprehensive letter that even talks about, like, what the savings are for taxpayers when you're not, paying for this, not paying for medications, hospitalizations, time off work for people, short-term disability, long-term disability. Regardless, the insurance company did not budge, and it was very, very costly. So I paid for it out of pocket because during the pandemic, my grandmother passed away suddenly, and I did not know this until after, but I was left money in her will.
Editing Audrey here. I feel like I skipped over this part because I was having feelings. Um, I was devastated when my grandmother passed away. I had gotten really close with her over the pandemic because I was calling a lot, and I tried to build a relationship with her. She lived really like she lived like 6 or 7 hours away, and we hadn't been super close when I was growing up, but I really tried to form that connection. And my calls, I started calling her on Sundays during the pandemic when I was driving into work, and um, she didn't even get to meet my youngest child. Um, so I when I talk about this, like her passing suddenly, like I sort of skimmed over, but um, I don't want it to seem like I'm insensitive. It was devastating for me losing her, um, and I miss her every day. But I don't know. I felt like I needed to justify that in this. I mean, I think people sometimes use humor as a coping mechanism. I definitely do, and laughing. So, anyways,
And it was, I kind of giggled about it when I was looking at paying for this because my grandmother was so straight laced and by the book and conservative that, I kind of cackled at her paying for me to go do drugs. It's an oversimplification, but anyways. So I started on infusions, I want to say the following week, and there were three different ways of doing the infusion, like doing your treatment. You could either have intranasal, like a spray, like a nasal spray, a sublingual tablet, or an IV. The IV was like like the IV was, leaps and bounds more effective than the other two modalities, and I was fine with that. And the industry offers two sort of treatments, either ketamine assisted psychotherapy or like talk therapy or just the treatment. I opted for just the treatment modality with this clinic. I actually think that was the only one offered. But they give you all sorts of like very, very, very specific instructions. So you have to stop a whole bunch of your medications a certain amount of days prior to your infusion. You have to fast before your infusion for a certain amount of hours in case you get nauseous and you're potentially vomiting when you're um, um, like you're not passed out, but you don't have your full capabilities. Anyways, and I did a lot of research on how to prepare yourself, things like that. So there's lots of prep work to do for a ketamine infusion outside of like not taking your medications and fasting. So I was really intentional about taking care of myself in the days leading up to, and especially the day of my infusion. So I made sure that on the way down I was listening to music that made me happy. I was avoiding heavy topics. I actually remember driving and like looking at videos and photos of my kids and just like getting in all those good vibes, those good feelings. I brought like a fuzzy blanket with me. I also brought like a really nice weighted eye mask and headphones. I had picked out a ketamine infusion therapy playlist on Spotify that I listened to. And so I got there. Everyone was super, super lovely. Like the clinic was so, so nice. The clinic that I went to is very much like a medical clinic. So you go and you sit in this chair. It's like the same chair you sit in if you're like getting blood work done or having an infusion or whatever. And it's, a medical office. They take my weight, they took my blood pressure, they put those like little sticky heart rate monitors, like one, and one. And then they did my IV. And I made sure I wore like really, really soft, cozy, comfy clothing. And they walked me through the process. So, they start the IV, it's about 40 minutes, and then about another half an hour to come out of it. They ask you some questions, and then you go home. So I remember like sitting back and putting my music on and stuff like that. And they turned on the lights if you want. I had my eye mask, but still. And I remember, feeling it come over me, and I was definitely like immobile. I couldn't really move anything, so I had already had my headphones on and my music playing, my eye mask, and again, like as someone who's not done drugs, I was a little taken aback by the sensation at first. It sort of felt like, when you're either in real life or in a dream, when you're like going up a roller coaster and you're going up, 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 and you're just on the edge, and there's that feeling of falling, especially in dreams. I've had those a lot, like that feeling of falling. That's what I felt like. And the music I was listening to was ambient. There was no lyrics that was, suggested as well, like just ambient, like music, whatever. Um, and so I remember my first infusion because I didn't black out. I remember my first infusion specifically. I was imagining being on the beach in Cuba with my husband. We had gone a few years ago and just feeling like the sun on my skin and the ocean and just whatever. And then it turned into something else. And I went through that. I felt like whatever I was experiencing in my mind during the infusion was directly impacted by the music. So, um, that like it sort of had been like oceanic at the beginning, which is probably what made me think of being on the beach. And yeah, so I definitely felt it in my body, and then I had no concept of time, so I knew where I was. At no point did I not know where I was. At no point did I like completely trip, lose my mind. I knew where I was. I had a continuous blood pressure monitor on, so like every once in a while it would like murr, murr, murr. So I knew where I was. And I was in my body, but I wasn't, which was so interesting. And eventually I felt, my music was still going, but I remember feeling like I could move my fingers and move my toes a little bit. And, it was wearing off. I was coming back to life. My IV was still in and everything. And slowly was able to like take off my mask and my headphones. I think I had to get help for that actually. And, just sort of waking up almost. The nurses were lovely. So a nurse sits there with you the whole time as well. That's the other thing. Like you're not alone. The doctor comes in to run the IV after the nurse has like set everything up, and then yeah, kind of away you go. And so they asked me like a standard set of questions just to make sure that like I wasn't having any adverse reactions. And then I was sent home. I remember sort of feeling like woozy and wobbly on my feet and walking out to the car. And then I had my husband take me to go get food, which I was super excited about because I hadn't eaten. I was really hungry. And there was like a few aftercare things. So they encourage you to, not do anything on screens, like try to avoid screens. Don't be like vegging in front of, the TV or doom scrolling on your phone. Avoid any really like heavy stuff. Just, sort of relax, right? Like that was the direction I'd been given. And I did. I slept incredibly well. It was great. And then the first week, I went for 2 infusions. So the treatment course I was on was, I think, called an acute course. So I did 2 infusions a week for 2 weeks, and then 1 infusion a week for 2 weeks, and then 1 infusion every other week for 2 cycles, and so on and so forth. And I remember, so I did the first one on a Tuesday, and then you're not really supposed to drive for the first 24 hours. So I had someone drive me to my osteopath appointment the next day. It's like a Wednesday afternoon, and I remember my osteopath was like, he was shocked by how like loose everything was. Like all my tension was, gone, right? I mean, I'd been seeing him for years, so I feel like he had a pretty solid idea of where I was carrying my tension in my body. And then after that, so I did Tuesday and Thursday, and I hadn't really, I wasn't sure like what difference I was experiencing. Like I was definitely relaxed and um, didn't have a lot of the typical tension that I feel like I carry in my body. And the Friday night, my partner and I were having a disagreement, and I was sad, and we were having a fight, and I remember being sad that it was happening. I remember crying, but what I noticed more than anything else was previously when we would fight or I would get upset, I would immediately catastrophize. I would feel it in my chest. I would feel like I couldn't breathe and I'd feel like I was dying. And that was the first time where I remember thinking like, okay, I'm sad about this. This is a stressful situation, but I don't feel like I'm going to die, which was wild for me, like absolutely insane. So that was a very clear indicator to me that like, okay, this was an effective treatment. And so I did this for a few months, and I, petered off. I weaned off the treatments as much as I could. Like it was pretty costly, and really, it was a lot logistically to have someone drive me down, stay there, drive home, put me to bed, take the time off work, not work the next day. Like it was a lot. Yes, honey. Go to Bluetooth in the settings. I still occasionally go for treatments. I switched to a clinic closer to me recently, and that clinic actually offers a guided psychotherapy component before. And so I've really benefited from this. Again, like this is just a very quick overview. Someone reached out to me recently, a friend of a friend who I used to work with, who was asking me about like she was going for treatment, and just sort of picking my brain about it. Ketamine really, really saved me. I I feel I sound really like flat when I talk about it because it's um, so ketamine completely changed my life. The um, the science behind it is that it allows your brain to be really plastic. Neuroplasticity is something that I know neuroscientists used to like really dispel, and people would sort of like laugh at anyone who believed in it. But more and more, the science we're seeing is that um, even if your brain has made pathways of like how you deal with things, the brain can actually, with help, rewrite those pathways or find new pathways or things like it's this idea that we're not stuck, right? Like your brain can can find new pathways to route emotions. And that was what I had been experiencing. So like for me, it was very obvious after the first week that like I suffer very much from very severe anxiety. My anxiety presentation has been such that I think I was just so exhausted and overwhelmed and feeling depressed because my brain was going 4,000 miles a minute all the time and there was no rest. So I was just incredibly fatigued and run down and not able to handle stress all the time. And so that's really changed how I live and has it's kind of hard to talk about because I can't talk enough. I can't properly get across the incredible impact that this treatment had on my life and my quality of life. Um, it it saved my life, and um, I don't know where I would be if I hadn't been able to access that. There's an incredible amount of privilege that comes with that too. Like I paid for my treatments out of pocket. I paid thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars out of pocket. And I would again, like I would beg, borrow, and steal if I had to be able to access that. My only regret is that I suffered. And I didn't even, the thing is, like, I didn't even know I was suffering. Like, I didn't even realize how bad it was until it wasn't bad anymore. And I could really feel like I remember feeling, I remember thinking, like, gosh, is this what everyone feels like? People feel like this just normal? Like, is this normal? That is my, like, I know as a knit and chat, I stopped knitting and just have been chatting. Um, and it's hard to put into words what it meant to me and what it means to me. Um, but yeah, I'm so excited for the field of mental health and the field of um, different treatment modalities for people, um, because yeah, like I didn't realize quite how much I was suffering until that um, that suffering was alleviated. So can't say enough good things. I feel like I'm not even really like portraying or getting across the improvement that this treatment made to my life. I can think clearer. I can, because my brain isn't constantly in fight or flight mode when there's stressful situations, I can think through them clearly. Like I can feel myself now, even like I haven't had a treatment in months, but I can feel myself being able to look at situations while I'm in them and be like, okay, how can, like giving myself new perspective or being able to find new perspectives that I wouldn't have been able to previously, even if I had someone there talking to me about those perspectives. Like, even if I had a therapist or something talking to me, being like, well, think about it like this. So, yeah, that is my experience. This video, like all my videos, has been a total slog to film because of tech issues and this setup. It's just going to be super fun trying to figure out how to take down, and hopefully I won't have the clothesline that it's hanging on fall out of my wall. Anyways, I know this is a very different this is a very different video than what you were probably expecting on a knitting podcast. I mean, I feel like I've been pretty transparent up until this point about mental health is like a very big part of my life, and I'm very open and honest about it. If you have any questions below, or you wanted to share your positive experience or whatever, drop them below. If we're not friends already on social, I would love to be. It's at Audrey Hill on Ravelry and at Fire and Fiber Makes on Instagram. Fire spelled the American way. And yeah, if you're not already a subscriber, I'd love to have you hang out. And yeah, I hope you have a great day and are staying well, and happy knitting.